Welcome, everyone. I'm Sue Barber, author, former IT director for a Fortune 500 company, turned executive coach, and this is the Visibility Factor podcast, where we explore how to raise your visibility and play bigger at work and in life. We'll explore key topics and welcome guests that help you shift your thinking about yourself so you can see new possibilities for your leadership. I'm on a mission to create a visibility movement for leaders to show their value and be seen for their true talent. Are you ready to take the next step towards a higher level of visibility for yourself? Let's go. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Visibility Factor podcast. This is Sue Barber, your host. I am thrilled to bring you my guest, Kathy Oneto, and her incredible book that is ready to go and come out into the marketplace next month. And her and I have been talking for quite a while, and we really wanted to introduce you to the concepts of her book and to let her share all the cool things that are in it. So welcome to the show, Kathy. I'd love you to introduce yourself, and then we'll get into conversation about your book.
Sounds great, Sue. Thanks so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. So yes, Kathy Oneto. I will start by saying that I am somebody who has embraced both my professional and personal ambitions across my adult life. At this point, I've had over a 25-year career, and I am in my second act at this point. And I have a portfolio career where I do both strategy consulting and also transformation work. But then I'm also the founder of Sustainable Ambition. And in that area, that's where the topic around which I wrote the book. I bring my strategic background to the idea of life-work integration and management. And I really explore rethinking success and ambition. And I'm passionate about really helping ambitious organizations, people, teams live and work differently for more personal success, satisfaction, and sustainability.
Well, that is definitely needed in the world we're in today. For sure. I love the name Sustainable Ambition, first of all, because it helps people start to see that there is a different way. Tell me how that came to be and why you wrote the book.
Sure. Well, I often tell the origin story of the title because it was very serendipitous. I think that it kind of came down to me as a creative idea, but actually came out of the mouth of my husband in the sense that we were talking about, I had hosted a workshop, a career transition workshop one day, and I was telling him about the experience and sharing some of the conversation that I had been having with the individuals participating in that workshop. And, he just kind of said, it's almost as if like you need really sustainable ambition. I was like, oh my gosh, that's a great term, And so as I shared it with others, it also stuck. It really resonated. And I think because what I was hearing in those workshops was even part of what I've experienced myself too, which is, we want to be ambitious, but sometimes we get to a point where we're like, ooh, this isn't resonating anymore. And when we hit those inflection points, it can be really unnerving and it can throw us off and it's really uncomfortable and we wonder what's wrong. And yet it's quite normal. And so that's what we were talking about, that, the other part of it is that we often in today's kind of think that ambition is often tied with effort, but it doesn't need to be tied to hustle. And I don't really like the term hustle culture, maybe because I'm a Gen Xer. It's like I didn't really, grow up with that term so much, per se. But, we do need a better way. I think we can be ambitious. It's a very normal thing for us to be ambitious as humans, but it doesn't have to mean that we're hustling all the time to get there, nor should it mean, in my opinion, that we check out, right? That I believe that we can find a sustainable path, a sustainable way forward.
Well, I love that your husband came up with that. That's brilliant for sure. I think about my own career where I had those inflection points for myself. And I think there are big ones, like when you're taking on some really, really big project that you've never done before, and it's a little scary. And is there a point of failure that you might experience? But also in terms of like having kids and leaving the workplace. And I know you talk a little bit about that. I was talking about somebody yesterday and they said, I'm at this point where I want to have more kids. And is that going to be a problem? Because I really also want to be a VP. And it was a really interesting conversation. I was thinking about what we were going to talk about today. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on those things, because I'm sure you've dealt with that too in your own experiences.
certainly in talking with clients, I don't have kids myself, but there certainly have been other things that I've had to kind of juggle, if you will, or think about like, how do I pace these things over the course of my life? And so, yes, I mean, that's a core component of the book, is to really think about, well, how do we pace our ambitions? How do we prioritize them? And I say, like, ambitions aren't time bound. And yet, if you take the example of what this individual was saying, like, well, I have both of these ambitions. I want to have more kids and I want to go for this role. And honestly, even though in the book, I do say, look, time is finite. Our energy is finite. That's just a reality. And yet, sustainable ambition is personal. You really need to define it for yourself. So I am not here to judge anybody. I'm not here to claim that you must make certain choices. I think there is a reality to that finiteness, if you will, that sometimes we do need to make choices. But I also want to encourage people to live a full, rich life. And if that is, the scope, if you will, of what someone wants to pursue, the only thing I advocate is to be thoughtful about the structures you're putting in place to support you around that, so that it can be sustainable. So you don't get overextended, overstretched, that you don't start to get into a position where you are burning out. And I will just say, there are people out there that are quite successful and have a large family. So it is possible, but you need to be intentional and thoughtful, I think, about how you craft that for yourself.
Totally agree. I love the word pace. I think that's a really great way to think about it, because not everybody is on the same journey at the same time either. I used to tell some of my team, they'd say, well, this person's already getting promoted and I'm not there yet and I should be there. And I said, this isn't a time thing. This is about how you're demonstrating the capabilities and the skills that you need to be ready for that. You don't want to get into that role and struggle. So we want you to be ready for it. So I think the pace word is really important, and I hope people can embrace that. And I totally see this as a framework to follow, to understand how to look at success and your life differently. One of the things in chapter 3 was a bit of an interview with Eva, and Eva talked about this project that she's doing, the storytelling project, The Life I Want, A Future for Work That Works for All. And I thought that was really impactful, because she's trying to look at her life and how she wants to live it. And that's what you're advocating, is for people to just define their success in the way that works for them in their life and in their work. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I would wholeheartedly agree with that. Yeah, I mean, I think where I'm really pointing people, and it's not like I'm the first person to say this, but I think I'm bringing it forward for people, because as humans, we're naturally impacted by the external forces around us, by the societal norms. And our societal norms today are very much focused on certain external drivers and rewards that don't motivate all of us. And there's plenty of research that suggests that these external drivers of what may motivate us for some time, they can turn sour. And what really is sustainable is identifying for yourself what is important to you, what matters to you, what motivates you. And so that's where I point people, is to reclaim success by defining it on your own terms. And it's not to say in that we're never going to be influenced by external, metrics or external motivators, because again, we're human, and some of us are also motivated naturally by those things. Like, I am an achievement oriented individual as well. And so, and I'll just admit, this is what I struggle with too, because I too am human. And, so I need to check myself and kind of say, hey, am I being influenced or, judging myself on these external factors, as opposed to, let me come back to what really matters to me. What's important to me? What is success for me? And to orient there first, because, control what our effort means to ourselves. We can't control what our efforts, mean to others and how they might judge what our effort might result in.
Mm-hmm. Have you had anyone that you've worked with who struggles with how to define success for themselves? Because I feel like that is something, to your point about the conditioning and societal norms and all of that, I think it's hard for people to imagine something different. So do you have any examples of somebody that you've worked with that you've helped see a different way?
I mean, I think there's many people probably that I've worked with that, where this is where we root things, right? Because what I talk about in the book, I offer 4 motivators to align our ambitions. And the reason I start there is because, as I said, it's not as if people have never heard like, hey, redefine success on your own terms. But oftentimes what happens and what I've heard from people is they don't know where to start. Mm-hmm. How do you start to define that for yourself? And honestly, even me coming to these 4 motivators was me being on a quest and on a journey to better understand, well, how do you define success? Or how do you define certain motivations for oneself? Or how do I guide myself to make the right choices in terms of knowing what I really want? Because that's the other question we're asked, right? Is what do you want? And so many of us will be like, I have no idea. I don't know what I want, right? And so where I point people is to, okay, well, let's do some visioning, right? Let's, not that we can always forecast where it's going to be, but oftentimes we do hold some big ambitions for our life that we can identify across both our life and our work, both of those realms. So I point people to look at, well, what is your vision? What are the values that are important to you? And really getting clear on within each of those values, what does that look like personally for you? So many of us who are coaches talk about like identifying values, right? It is a really common and important lens through which to identify what matters to us. But what's also important within that is to get really specific and clear around, both you and I might like learning, Sue, but like what learning looks like for you might look different than what learning looks like for me. So getting really clear about what that looks like in your life. And then how do you like to give and contribute? That's kind of the purpose or why, but I like to bring it down to give and contribute because I think it's more accessible for people. And then finally, what do you love? And so and that's really tapping into personal intrinsic motivators. And so what do you do just because you enjoy the process, right? So I'm not giving you a specific person just because I feel like I use those in all of my work. And so it's kind of like I'd have to give you everybody. But I think that, what helps is that sometimes what I have people do is to test an ambition and say, is this ambition mine? And use these motivators and some prompts around it to kind of test, how does this align to these different motivators? And what people can experience is either they might find like, ooh, it's not aligning, or they get recommitted, or they're like, oh, this does fit for me. I am energized around this. And so they understand why this is important to them and perhaps why it's important to them now.
I love the idea of testing the ambition and just playing with it. It's like a little experiment. Let's just test it out, see what happens. And if it works, great. If it doesn't, we'll change it. Because there is a sense of, I think, permanence people have around where they think that they should go. And I think it's hard for people to imagine that they could do or try something and then change their mind. It just doesn't feel like something we were taught.
No, we aren't. I mean, this is one of the key things that I get a little passionate about around this topic, which is this idea that ambition ebbs and flows. And within that, it's both the fact that what we want can change, and also that our intensity level of our ambition can go down, up and down at different times of our life. And I think that because we don't talk about it, because it's not something we're taught, we're surprised and thrown off when it happens. Yes. And yet it's a very natural thing. It's very normal for our ambitions to change as we go through different stages of life, or as we experience different stages even of an ambition, even around sustainable ambition. And this body of work for me and coming to this stage of the book, things are shifting for me. Something's changing. A new ambition is brewing. I shouldn't actually be surprised by that. It kind of makes sense after like this long 5-year cycle of kind of really going deep into this. So, it's a very natural thing for us to have things change because we change. Our lives change, our work environment change, the world context changes. So we're going to have, that's why we have those inflection points, right?
Yes, absolutely. So would you walk through the sustainable ambition method that's in the book?
Sure. Yes. So the sustainable ambition method, what I say is really that I point people to, instead of focusing on work-life balance, to instead think about building life-work sustainability. And that really you find that sustainability at the intersection of aligning the right ambitions at the right time with the right effort. And so right ambition is about a bit of what we've been talking about, which is shifting away from defining ambitions based on external factors and external rewards, and instead shifting that toward defining your ambitions around internal drivers and internal motivators. So what is going to be personally rewarding to you? And so in the end, around that, the idea is to identify some self-defined, meaningful and motivating goals for oneself. Around right time, that's about really looking at, when we're defining our ambitions for a period in our life, really looking at both life and work together and seeing that, time is impacted by our life stage and what might be important for us now. So it asks us to think about prioritizing, think about pacing our ambitions, things of that nature. So around those ambitions, also getting aligned to, well, what really matters for you right now at this moment in your life across both the spheres of your life and your work. And then finally, right effort is about, okay, well, in the pursuit of these ambitions, are we being discerning about the effort we're putting toward our goals? I also say, our ambitions and goals are not created equal. They don't all deserve the same level of effort. But also, are we being really intentional and thoughtful about how we're sustaining ourselves in the pursuit of our ambitions?
It's just a really great method for people to leverage and look at and answer some of those questions for themselves, because it is a reflection moment to figure that out for yourself. No one can tell you, go do this, right? Because even if I tell someone to go do this, it doesn't mean it's going to work for them. They may not enjoy it. So there's a little bit of internal work that people have to do on themselves to figure some of this out.
For sure, Sue. And I will just say thank you for bringing that up too, because I think it's important for me to tell people, why do I use the term right? Because oftentimes people think that, oh, there's a right or a wrong. And what I really mean by right is think Goldilocks, right? It's kind of like, it really is important to get it right for you. When I use the term right, these are ambitions and goals that are right for you at this moment in time, et cetera. So getting it right is really about, you need to know yourself, and as opposed to losing yourself. And I think what can really happen in the course of our adult lives is we just follow what's in front of us, and we can lose ourselves in the process and get to a point where we're kind of like, wait, how did I end up here? And wonder what we're doing now. And so my invitation is to have people become a bit more what I call consciously ambitious, and be a bit more intentional about what they're crafting for their life and for their work.
Have you found anyone struggles at all with the word ambition in general? Because sometimes people see it as I think especially for women, they see it as, I can't talk about that. It seems like I'm being too bold or too much. And I tell people, anyone can have ambition, right? It's how you choose to use it. But have you found anyone struggles with the word? Because it does sometimes have a negative connotation depending on how they use it.
Yeah, for sure. And that's a common, as you're saying, it's a common thing that's discussed in our society, and plenty is written about it. And certainly for women, it's, has this very negative connotation. And yet, what I find interesting about it, Sue, is you have some people that are, and I call this out in the book, where especially during the pandemic, where they're kind of like, I'm not going to swear on this podcast, but it's like, they're kind of like, I am over my ambition, right? And I kind of talk about different states of ambition where people are either disillusioned by ambition or they are rebellious against it. And so I think people can feel that way. But honestly, I actually get, my sense is that people actually kind of want to embrace their ambition more and want to even embrace the term. I think it's just that, again, we put these societal definitions to terms, and I'm trying to have us reclaim it in a way that, suits us, because the reality is, as humans, we are goal oriented. We are ambitious. It's a natural state. So, I just like to say, as humans, we're creating these constructs. So why can't we create a new construct?
I love that, because when you are operating from a certain belief system or things that you've learned as you grew up or people have told you, many people don't recognize that they can change those beliefs at any time, and they think that they have to hold on to them. And what you're proposing here is giving people a new way to think about ambition, and they can shift their definition of it, shift what success looks like for them. And I think that is something that people need right now, because there are so many pushes and pulls on our time and what we really want to get out of life. And I love that you are helping people kind of show them a path of how to get there. How have you used this to help people gain clarity for themselves in terms of next roles or next types of roles that they might pursue?
That's a really great question. And I think when I think about this, like figuring out what's next, there are two components of the method that I lean into the most, which is the right ambition component as well as the right time. So part of it in terms of trying to figure out what people might want to do next is to point people to be like, well, what are you curious about? And I'm sure in you working with people too, I think what often happens is that people wait a little too long to start to get curious and to start to explore what might be next. And I really lean into what Peter Drucker said, which is you need to start thinking about your second career and your second act way sooner than you think. Mm-hmm. He didn't quite say it like that, but that's generally the gist, right? And I wholeheartedly agree. Like it takes time. And I have several examples around me right now. One of my clients in particular who's like finally going to take a sabbatical. And he's like, wow, we started working on this 4 years ago. And it's like, yeah, it takes time, to figure out like, hey, we worked on, well, what am I longing for? What is my vision? What are some of my ambitions across both life and work? And so these are some of the things that we explored and looked at some of those motivators to kind of develop ideas. But then what we also did was looking at from a right time perspective. I have like what I call a horizon map where I say, well, what's now, near, or next? Or, just think about different time frames. And you can use those time frames as you see fit. You can use that model in a year, or you can use it over the course of like, well, what might I want to do in my next 5 years, 10 years, 20 years time frame? And so I think what helps is to have people start to envision and then think about, well, how do I want to pace some of those ambitions and what might be next? And is the next season, is that next period of my life for this particular ambition, or am I going to push that out to another period of time? So, I think we do this more than we realize. That we kind of say, some people might be like, I'm not ready to get married yet. I'm in my, 20s, early 20s. Like, I just want to be free, et cetera. I'm going to push that off to my 30s, having kids at a certain time, or when am I going to retire? Whatever it might be. We think about these things and we do this more naturally than I think we realize. But that's a bit of how I have people start to play with that and invite them into exploring some of what might be next.
That is amazing. I love that answer, because there's a lot of people who get to a point in their career where maybe they get laid off or they are impacted by some changes in the organization and they're in a role now that they hate. And they never, ever considered leaving or thinking about doing something else. And I think that is something that I've always tried to think about, the next thing, and be prepared for that. Is that something that you think people just naturally have? The ability to look forward and think about that, or that's something that they have to grow within them to start thinking that way?
My guess is it's a mix, but I think it's probably more the latter in terms of grow into that. And I guess where I would say is like, some of us are planners. Like my husband and I, we are just planners. We think forward. We always have. And it doesn't mean we don't live in the present at all. We do think ahead. But that's not everyone. So I think that, and I would say that's probably the majority of people are not actually kind of forecasting forward. And I think there's a balancing act there too, because we are not the best at forecasting what really is going to make us happy in the future. But I think that's why it's important to start to test things early and to kind of start to explore things. And again, start to plant some of those seeds to build towards what's next. And then to part of what I believe, and this is one of the areas I want to continue to explore a little bit more. We don't like uncertainty. Humans don't like uncertainty because it's costly from an energy perspective. But the reality is around our careers, we all seek clarity. What do I want to do? And yet I think really what it requires is how do we dance with the ambiguity and with the uncertainty, and I think that's what we need to get better at learning how to do. And yet with all that said, I'll come back to you're like, hey, what do people need to do? I think people probably need to foster this side of themselves, which is how do you step into curiosity? How do you step into experimentation and exploration to kind of start to see what might be next for you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's amazing, because one of the talks that I do is around taking charge of your career and helping people understand, like in many ways, I let craft drive a lot of my career, but I learned a lot from it. So I don't regret it in any way. But the concept of understanding what it is you might want and managing those conversations for yourself and asking for what you want. I don't know that I gave myself permission to do that early enough. And I want to try to help people understand that they can do that. But it's also about the clarity piece. And I love that you use that word, because one of the things that I think people struggle with is they'll go to their boss and say, hey, I want to do something else. I want to do the next thing. But they have no clarity for themselves about what that is. And then they can't communicate it to anyone else. And what I talk to them about is if you can't tell people what you want, how can they help you? So I'm wondering if there's things that they can take away from your book that will help them with some of that and be able to have that conversation.
Yeah. And when I think about and talk with people about what I call like building a regenerative career, I kind of point people towards, and they do connect back to things that I have in the book. So I'll try to do that as I share them. One is like to think about like what will be satisfying for you next. And so this idea of, I like to point people to just tune in to kind of self-reflect and feel like, well, what's trending up and what's trending down? Meaning like, well, what's pulling you these days? Again, it goes back to those curiosities. Like, what am I being drawn to? What am I kind of, enjoying most? And then at this point, like, hey, maybe I'm at the bottom of a growth curve and maybe there's things that I'm just kind of overdoing or not, I'm just not as interested in them anymore. So what's trending down? So getting clear on some of that. And some of those things can connect back to a redefinition of some of your values, some of the things that you're loving, things of that nature. The second area that I point people to is like, well, what's your next stretch? So how do you want to grow next? What do you want to learn? Is there some area that you want to master and get better at? So if you can identify some of those areas where you want to stretch next, because again, if you go to your boss and say, here's what I'd love to learn. Here's what I'd love to grow, right? And then the final is like, well, what do you want to strive for next? What might be your next aspiration? Ambitions grow with us over time. And so once we reach a certain level, it's like, there's many people I know who at a certain stage in their career, they were like, I never would have thought I wanted to be a general manager of a business. But as I continued on and got more experience, like I started to realize that actually was my next ambition. That's not everybody, but I do think we grow into certain ambitions over time. So it's kind of like, okay, based on where you're at now, not to say that we always have to strive for that next thing, but what do you want to be ambitious about? And there may be some overlap across those three. But that's where I would point people, which is, again, what's satisfying? What's the next stretch? How do you want to strive next? Are three kind of anchors that I leverage.
I love that example that you gave of the general manager even, right? Because we can only go sometimes to something bigger when we can see it's possible. And if we can't see it's possible, then we limit ourselves, right, into what we can see around us. And that's one of the things I try to work with people on is there's all kinds of possibilities. What is it that you want? And opening that door up for people to look at it. How do you help people who have a fixed mindset and don't believe that they can do something more and really tap into future ambitions for themselves?
Yeah, this is really great. I mean, we often need people outside of ourselves to see what's possible for us. Sometimes we can get into that state. So I think often if people are stuck or kind of in that state, I think connecting with others who see them and know them and know their strengths. So that could be a coach for sure. Sometimes that is really a great time to tap into a coach who can work with you to understand what are your strengths? What are your gifts? I mean, I think it's why going back to some of the exercises of like really understanding what do you value? How do you like to give and contribute? Where do you like to make an impact? And to unpack also, what have you accomplished to date to build that level of self-efficacy and confidence in people? And then to talk about, well, what might be possible for you from here? And I think leveraging, like I said, coming back to this idea of leveraging other people who can see your potential, I think can be really valuable. So that can be mentors, prior bosses, or like I said, working with a coach. It could be a good friend. It is, I think, about finding the right people though, right? You really have to ask the right people to see that potential. The other idea I'm going to throw out, Sue, and you might be shocked that I'm going to share this, but I'm just going to say, because I've actually been using this a little bit myself, is AI is not a bad tool in this regard. So if you can get clear on what your strengths are, what your values are, what you love to do, things of that nature, and you're kind of getting stuck on like, hey, what might be possible for me? What is out there where I might be able to apply these in a new and different way? Use AI and plug that into AI and say, hey, can you help me generate some ideas around how I can apply these parts of myself and who I am to, relevant things out there in the world? Guess what? It has ideas. And it actually, I have found it unlocks things for me. I'm not looking for it to like create my vision for my life, but what it has done is it sparked new ideas that I had not even thought about, or some of the ideas I did have for myself. It's widened the lens or broadened the lens. And honestly, it's energized me to be like, ooh, that might be possible. So if you're feeling stuck, that might be another tool and resource. I mean, I am all for human connection. Honestly, I think humans are going to know you best, but I will also say that's another tool that people can use.
I 100% agree. I use it it's almost like a little thought partner for me in many ways. When I'm stuck or trying to come up with ideas on something, or just to see if I'm missing something, right? Is there something that I'm missing and what I want to share about this? It really is helpful. I have a friend of mine who is using it to try to come up with a personal brand statement for herself. And it is really helpful because it gives you different options, and then you can mix and match them and create something that's really authentic to you, which, can be really fun to do as well. So is there anything else that you really are hoping that this book will do for people?
So to answer that question, there are a couple of things that I really like to emphasize around this for people. One is that for those of us who are ambitious, and likely all of us humans, just to recognize that this is a dance. It's a practice. It is not something that like, I do not have this magic wand, just wave the sustainable ambition magic wand and all will be great. It's like, the reality is that living an adult life in this world is challenging. We're stretched. We have a lot to do. And especially if you're ambitious and you want to lead a full life, and there's nothing wrong with that. And so to embrace the idea that this is a practice, it is something that you do have to come back to again and again. And I am right there with you doing that. And that's just a part of being human. And I think along those lines, that's another invitation I really like to leave people with, which is to just be generous with yourself and give yourself grace around this. Because again, we are human. We're not always going to get it right. And it means we just have to come at it again and kind of check in with ourselves and say, okay, where am I today? And how can I take a step toward more sustainability from where I'm standing right now?
Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Okay, well, we're going to transition into what I call a Rise Up and Be Visible quick tips. So these are 4 questions I ask every guest. Cannot wait to hear your answers. So the first one is, what is visibility and why did you answer it that way?
So as I was reflecting on this, to me, visibility is being seen and being heard and having an impact. And I think that being seen for me is about being seen for who you are or for who you want to be known as. It's kind of obvious in the sense of like, don't hide, allow yourself to be seen and to offer your gifts to the world is a bit of what I'm saying in that. And I think along those lines, then it is also to be heard. Are you having a voice in the conversations that are important to you, where it matters, where you want to have that impact, as I'm saying? And I do think that visibility is where you are having an impact. And in the sense of that can be, what is not in the room if you are not there, or what is not being done or accomplished or present when you're not there. And I think one thing I just like to point out around this is how important even something like role modeling is in this, just in terms of how you show up. One of the greatest gifts of feedback that was ever given to me was written in a writing workshop I took years ago in a forum. It was before Zoom and all these technologies. It was just a forum from a class. A writing class I was taking at Stanford. And we had this painful forum where we had to like scroll through everything. And somebody wrote me a personal note and said, Kathy, thank you for being an inspiration through this class. I thought for sure after the first class you were going to drop out. You did not. And you were an inspiration for me throughout to stick with it myself. And I was flabbergasted. I was just like, I had no idea that this individual was impacted by me just showing up week after week. And so just recognize we have an impact more than we realize. And I think that is a part of being visible.
Oh, incredible answer. Oh my gosh. Yeah, I hear that from people too. And I think, oh my gosh, I don't even remember saying that. So yeah, it's so incredible. Love that. Okay. What are you doing to be visible?
Well, part of what I'm doing to be visible is like writing a book and putting it out there in the world. I also have a podcast and it started there, and I've written over time too, and I will say, like, I cringe every time I post on LinkedIn, but I do it. I do it because I do want to have a voice, and I do want to be visible in that way. But really the way that I think about it for myself, borrowing from Pam Slim's terminology, which is I want a body of work. And I really, in this stage of my life and career, I wanted my own body of work. And that's part of what I'm doing right now. And that's a part of how I'm thinking about my own visibility.
What is the best career or leadership advice you've received?
It came from my college professor that I was working for at the time. And I still think this is wise advice, which is try something. Just stop fretting about it or thinking, am I taking the right path? Just get into action and try something. We won't know until we try.
Mm-hmm. And what is a book you would recommend?
Okay, I'm going to go overboard here and I'm going to give you 3.
I love that. Overachiever.
Yes. Well, because I really love these books this year. So like there's Tiny Experiments by Anne Lecomte, which came out at the beginning of this year, which I really love. I also had the opportunity to interview Dr. Richard Saphir, who wrote a book, A Cure for the Common Company, a well-being prescription for a happier, healthier, and more resilient workforce. And I really appreciate him. And I appreciate this book because it really is a roadmap to how do you build a culture that supports well-being. Mm. And I think it's really well done. And he works at Johns Hopkins and, does this work there. And I think he has some real practical ways to get this into action, and especially at the team level and for leaders. And then the final one is Emotionally Charged by Dina Denham-Smith and Alicia Grandy. That just came out a couple months ago as well, and I think is so highly relevant for this time and the emotional labor that leaders are carrying. That is just, you wonder why people are so burnt out, as leaders, is that, us learning how to navigate being there emotionally for teams, for ourselves, I think is really important. I think that's an important body of work that they've contributed.
Oh, thank you for sharing those. I'm going to add them to the notes for everybody, but I am going to add them to my list of books to start checking out next. Thank you for being here. I would love for you to share how people can connect with you if they want to know more about the book and more about you.
Yes, thank you. Well, people can find me on LinkedIn at Kathy Oneto, and I'm sure you'll put that in the show notes. Sure. And then they can find more about Sustainable Ambition and the book at sustainableambition.com. And they can also find my podcast on Sustainable Ambition on all the podcast players.
Excellent. Well, I can attest that it's wonderful. You will learn a lot on her podcast. What's the exact date the book is coming out? June 10th?
June 10th.
So you're going to see a whole lot more about the book on LinkedIn if you start to follow her. And I will also be sharing on her behalf because I know the book is amazing. I've already got a copy of it myself. So I'm thrilled for you and so excited for this next chapter for you to get your body of work out in a bigger way. So love this for you. So excited. Thanks for being here.
Thanks so much for having me, Sue. It's been a pleasure.
Of course. Well, thanks everybody for joining today on the Visibility Factor podcast, and we'll catch you on the next one. Thanks so much for listening to the Visibility Factor podcast. Remember that visibility starts with small steps that are intentional and consistent each day. Be bold, be visible, be the leader you were meant to be. Find us and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever else you listen to podcasts. Follow us on all of our social media platforms, which are highlighted in the show notes. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time on the Visibility Factor podcast.